So Admiral William and his wife Shirley Crowe,
Mhm.
Distinguished Chair of Economics at the United States Naval Academy, Professor Brenda Boltwood, welcome this morning, and it's so glad to have you here for a conversation.
Thanks, Joe. It's a
Yeah,
pleasure to be here and to continue the discussion of great power competition and the role it will play in the life of our midshipmen.
yeah. This has been an extended conversation
Yeah.
between you and I, but we probably ought to start with, given the fact that Admiral Crowe and Admiral Stockdale were classmates, they're interred side by side. They enjoyed such a long and close personal friendship as well as collegial relationship. Tell us a little bit about the role. Some people may not know that there's these named chairs and named
Mm.
visiting professorships. Tell us a little bit about that before we get into your backstory.
Right. The interesting thing was, Admiral Crowe, had a very distinguished career, not only in the Navy, but then serving under a
He's a
variety of
diplomat.
presidents as a
Yeah.
diplomat, and then came to the Naval Academy and actually taught in the political science
Right.
department. But he and his family decided to, kind of endow this chair in the economics department with the idea that, the story around the economics of national defense is something every midshipman should understand.
Right.
And it's all about, describing how it works. How is it that the United States, as a free market capitalist economy, can fund now almost $1 trillion from its budget to fund the U.S. military, across the services, across, generations of procurement, whether it's in submarines, ships, and aircraft, but also with an eye to the new technology and the changes in warfare
Right.
that are happening in the world around us.
Right.
So the idea is to try to structure a class so that we not only can teach the midshipmen about the foundations of,
Sure.
economics and national defense. So, for example, how do you perform a risk assessment? How is that related to the national defense strategy? Are we really addressing the national security risks as
Yeah.
we're, implementing and executing our national defense strategy?
Right.
Then how is that national defense strategy funded? Where does the money come from?
Yeah.
Why do taxpayers in the United States agree to pay for a
Sure.
military? What
Sure.
kind of public good is that? And then once it's funded, what's the process as it goes through Congress? And then what happens when the DoD is allocated this money?
So,
Right.
and that's perfect, and in perfect keeping with the legacy
Yeah.
of Admiral Crowe for
Right.
sure, because of his
Right.
just the breadth of his background. But let's talk about why you're the right person for this role. Your background spans a lot of fields,
Mm.
right? It's private sector, in the energy industry,
Yeah.
banking,
Yeah.
and then even at the International Monetary Fund before coming here.
Right.
You mentioned the word risk several times. That's woven throughout this
Mm.
process. Give us a quick overview, a kind of a
Sure.
recap of your experience and what lands you here in this particular role as a result.
Oh, sure. So, after undergraduate school, I was in New York City at Columbia University, and I had the opportunity to be an intern at the World Bank. I didn't know how I'd spend my career, but I was definitely inspired by economists who serve the world. They decided that, they would apply the academic research, but also, build bridges in Kenya, build farm and productivity across Latin America. So
Mhm.
that level of dedication and service to the world was very inspiring. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I wanted to work with people that smart and that innovative,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I went back to graduate school and changed my major to get a PhD in economics, and went straight through. I have no regrets. It was a great decision. I taught for 6 years after completing my PhD, but really, had a taste of what you could call Wall Street,
Yeah.
because while I was in grad school, I had the opportunity to work at Bank of America Securities and Chemical Bank Product Development Group, which was part of, it's now part of JP Morgan. But my role in product development was analytics and
right.
modeling what were then the new financial market innovations, derivatives, right? Futures contracts, forward contracts, swaps, options. The financial markets didn't know this stuff, right? So there we were.
Kind of at the leading edge of that trend.
At the leading edge.
Yeah.
And I was a quant trying to model the upside and downside, for the investors and the bank. So that gave me a sense of like innovation, and isn't it cool to be working with people that are, really serving customers, but changing the world as we do it, and changing the way the economy works. So after teaching for a while, I wanted to go back into that environment, and I consulted for 5 years almost with Price Waterhouse. It became Price Waterhouse Coopers in a financial risk management group. I got recruited to JP Morgan's predecessor, Bank One, in Chicago. And there I headed up market risk, counterparty credit, and operational risk, just as the regulators were forming their first ideas about the fact that banks should have formal programs around risk management. It hadn't been a formal discipline other than credit risk, which at that time was more like, how well do you know your banker? Like, did you grow up with this guy? Could you vouch for him? Well, things got quantified, right? And, your credit risk was a number all of a sudden, not just the strength of a relationship. And similar with market risk and how we now look at what we call operational risk, our people, process, systems.
That's where the seeds were planted that you've kind of carried through.
Yeah. And, really working collaboratively with regulators, but also with other financial institutions as we struggled to understand and meet and help create some of these standards.
Yeah.
So that Bank One was acquired by JP Morgan. I moved back to New York City. There I had the opportunity to work in a number of risk management roles, but also being pulled out to run businesses and based in London to run a global derivative services business, and then lead strategy for what's called worldwide security services and alternative investments, which at that time, private equity, venture capital, was just kind of getting a foothold. So those were, terrific formative experiences.
Sounds like it.
Then I got recruited to Constellation Energy in Baltimore. They had been formed as a joint venture with Goldman Sachs and Baltimore Gas and Electric. They formed a parent company that had become the largest commercial energy company in the country. Number 1 electricity trader, number 3 gas trader, but also with the largest retail energy business in deregulated states. And then the largest nuclear fleet. We had fossil generation and the start of renewables. So, for me to come and try to apply like Wall Street standard banking, but understand that risk management was now at an energy company about life and death. Right. It wasn't just numbers anymore. I had a pair of steel-toed boots. I had to tour the nuclear plants. I had to go into the coal plants. And, this was really, serious stuff. Operational risk was very human at that point. And then Constellation, we went through the financial crisis. For a short time, we had been acquired by Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett's team was there doing due diligence. We were one of 3 companies bailed out during the financial crisis, Goldman Sachs and GE Capital and Constellation. But, apparently they did due diligence on over 200 companies. And what differentiated Constellation was our risk management numbers. So whatever scenario they threw at us, we could quantify it. We could understand the impact on our liquidity, on our capital, and so on. So, but there was a change of control in 2012, and I thought about retirement, but I thought, no way I can do that. I got recruited, strangely by a company that had worked for Constellation as a vendor. They were a Silicon Valley risk management and compliance software company, and they recruited me to lead sales for them in a variety of sectors, including financial services and energy. But I wound up doing most of my work in London, trying to grow their business to the same size as their North American footprint. We were successful, but I guess largely unsuccessful in that, you go out there to grow a company and it's funded by venture capital and private equity, and you hope to take it public. We never went public. The company still exists, but it was a wonderful, terrific learning experience.
I can imagine.
And worked with our board members who were from, Temasek Capital in Singapore and Goldman Sachs and, Sage View Capital from Silicon Valley. So that was terrific. How does Silicon Valley work? How will the private credit markets, come to, grow to
Sure.
the state today where they do almost, well, in some cases, more lending than the public banks like JP
Yeah.
Morgan. So that led to a call from the IMF asking if I would, head up their risk management area. I did that for 3
What
years.
that call look like? Tell us about that call
Well,
a
they
little
were-
bit. That's
yeah.
a unique thing.
Yeah.
Not many people, I think, are called directly by the International Monetary Fund for their expertise.
By their recruiters, to think about this role. But yeah, the IMF had been formed as part of the Bretton Woods Agreement post 1944,
Mhm.
as World War II was ending. And the idea was to create an institution that could do short-term balance of payment lending,
Right.
economic surveillance, so keep track of consistent numbers across countries, and then also some capacity development and training of our member countries, so that for example, when Soviet Union disintegrated and Russia had to stand up a finance ministry and central bank, where do you go to get your central bankers, your economists trained from a communist kind of mentality to one where they're now part of
Markets,
a global
yeah.
market system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the IMF is a very special institution, but they had existed for almost 80 years when they were calling me, and they had never really had a risk management policy, strangely enough. And arguably you could say they're managing the largest risks in the financial system, and but it was really the
largest
board.
scale, for sure.
At the largest scale. And the board members were, many of them had been central bankers and, worked in finance ministries and were used to like an enterprise risk management program. And so they really kind of raised the awareness at the fund and, made a call. There was an audit report done and it called for the recruitment of a chief risk officer. So I went there and we had the first risk management policy approved. We created an amazing team of people from the fund, but also some externally recruited people, and really tried to launch a program. It was with a lot of resistance. I mean, this was big change for an institution, but the policies still exist, and I think the change happens over time. But I feel very fortunate that a colleague of mine now in the political science department sent me a link because I was living in the Annapolis area and had talked about for a long time. I've been trying to get back into academics. I love teaching.
Great.
I've had a great career, but how do I bring these experiences to the classroom, right?
Right.
So this position came up and I applied and, worked out a syllabus for the types of classes that Admiral Crowe and his family were considering. And the economics department hired me.
Yeah.
So I feel very fortunate.
Yeah.
And it's just been one of the best
Been a fun run.
experiences of my life.
Well, I mean, the Academy is very fortunate for landing someone with the breadth of that background. I mean, that's an incredible background from all these various angles on economics. Tell us just a little bit about the courses that you are teaching. What are the things that you're bringing to midshipmen? Especially folks that listen to this may not be familiar with economics as a major or some of the things that economics majors or just midshipmen more generally are able to access via the economics department and specifically your courses?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So quantitative economics, it's a popular major. We have a cap on the number of degrees we can grant every year based on Navy demand at 110. And we're typically fairly well subscribed to that.
Yep.
And we have a lot of curious midshipmen that are interested not only in, the macroeconomy and, how does the Federal Reserve and, macroeconomics work, but also the microeconomics of labor markets and industrial organization, game theory, all tools that a naval officer, especially as they rise in the ranks, will need to apply, to their decision making.
Right.
So so I think it's a nice part of the humanities department that really trains our midshipmen to be very critical thinkers, but also work with data, develop empirical models so that by the time they're doing their capstone, they're working on real world, applied topics for the Navy. So, for example, last year, as part of an academic research challenge, one of the economics department professors worked with the midshipmen on a billeting algorithm that was designed to improve retention, in the Navy, but across any service, where we could instill midshipman preferences or officer preferences into the future billeting model. And the idea being that if you have preferences that can be at least partially met, but with explanations why there may have to be deviations, you're much more likely to retain that Navy or Marine officer
so they're
as
serving
they go through their career.
This is solving some real world problems here for the Navy. So you're connected in many ways to the Navy. And midshipmen are getting a taste of the challenges facing the fleet and Navy, Marine Corps, and some problem solving in that direction.
And we get midshipmen interested in these, really important problems for the Navy. And, in this case, Professor Naomi Utgoff, working with a group of midshipmen, taking from the economic literature, ideas about, preferences and how you create an algorithm to incorporate, more information to lead to better outcomes.
Now, some people may hear that and say, well, you said earlier you're part of the Humanities and Social Sciences School of now, as it's referred to. That the work you're doing seems highly technical, highly mathematically informed, at least. How does that fit into humanities social sciences here, the bigger structure?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question. The degree in economics is called quantitative economics. But like the rest of humanities, all of our students come from this amazing STEM foundation that's built at the Naval Academy. So the midshipmen are uniquely qualified to really dive into, like the econometric work or the theoretical, building algorithms and thinking through how models might be applied across the services. And I think that's true of our political science majors, our history majors, because they are steeped in calculus and chemistry and physics, right?
Sure.
So they're always thinking about the real world application of this, right? And it comes not only through the writing they're doing, but the way they're forming their decision models, right?
Yeah. So problem solving then involves rigorous processes that certainly quantitative economics majors are steeped in. That I love that idea. Let's extend that a little bit. I know you're also involved in capstones, very closely with capstones. We, in an earlier version of this podcast, had a lengthy conversation with Provost Samara Fireball. And capstones are her favorite subject, as she always says. You've done some really fascinating ones. And now these are, of course, highly specialized. This is not the general courses, core courses, but rather deep research done by firsties or seniors. Could you talk a little bit about some of those capstones? We feature those in the film as well.
Yeah. So, Joe, the Naval Academy last year had a unique opportunity to participate in what the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff called an Academic Research Challenge, or ARC. And for the last 3 years, now 4 years, they've been coming out with the top 4 or 5 academic research challenges of the Defense Department. And they said, it would be really great if we could have our postgraduate schools. And as of last year, they invited West Point, Naval Academy, Coast Guard Academy to also participate. So we have the undergraduate military institutions. But we're going to publish every year these top 5 academic research challenges. Last year, the topics ranged from, how do we manage risk over time within the Joint Chiefs so that we can make appropriate trade-offs between, yes, yes,
your sweet spot, right?
yeah,
That's
it is.
exactly
It was
what you've been
very
doing.
related to what I've
Perfect.
spent my career doing. But,
Yeah.
how do we trade off the risks we face today as we think of, what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, but yet we face long-term challenges in the Asia Pacific and with a peer rival we call in our strategy, China. And so how do we make the trade-offs? Do we really work to treat the risks we have today around, helping to procure the right weapon systems for Ukraine? Or do we need to think more about the risks we have in, it might be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but what is the framework that would allow the admirals and generals to make the best decision, right? Considering all the possible risk scenarios, also differentiating between when there's risk and uncertainty, right? Yeah. So we brought together a group of 8 midshipmen to work on this project, and they produced a paper. And we've done some publications of their papers, but that was just one of 4 topics that the Naval Academy submitted. We also submitted this work on that billeting algorithm.
Right.
Incorporating preferences. That became a capstone project as well. We also had a project related to Homeland Security, where members of the math, chemistry, robotics, and engineering departments work together. The professors work together, but they have invented, working with midshipmen, a unique device that detects radiation. We think that's very important for Homeland Security and border control.
Sure.
As we have cars and trucks passing our border, we have the ability to do traditional detection, but the problem there is that there are a lot of false positives. So the Naval Academy research here, we've refined the chemistry of that research and have gotten a tool. It looks like a smartphone, actually,
really?
That a border security agent could hold and detect, and get, almost 100%, correct hits on whether that vehicle is carrying radioactive material, right? So that was one project. And then another one was, around how, the defense industrial base could be enhanced through more rapid technology adoption, through what we call small business development centers. So when we think of defense innovation, we think of like the Defense Innovation Unit at the DoD level. Yep. And they've set up offices in the Pentagon, also in Mountain View, California. But the question is, could we enhance innovation if these offices were located in the proximity of the firms that are doing the
innovation in the private sector?
Yeah, so where it's Austin, Texas, or it could be New York City, or it could be Des Moines, Iowa, right?
Right.
And, what kind of benefits could there be if a group like the Defense Innovation Unit had smaller satellite offices and could bring humans that have had success, in developing a startup, but also securing Department of Defense contracts for innovation?
Interesting.
How could we bring that and foster more competitiveness in the defense industrial base?
So these projects, we're not talking merely the strategic level that we're exposing midshipmen to. This is grand strategy, right? This is the elements of national power.
I think so.
That are in play.
Yeah.
That's not something that many people associate with a service academy education. We think, well, we're going to put them into these tactical situations. What do you think the main benefits of this exposure to these really big problem sets that affect national security, homeland security, and so on are going to be for their long-term perspective?
Yeah, so I think the short-term benefits were clear. They all created capstone projects, and in front of Professor Feuerbach, we were able to display this amazing, innovative work that was addressing the DoD's top academic research challenges, and how the Naval Academy, while we might not have won the competition, we did really succeed in inspiring midshipmen, and create a really deep understanding of these challenges that the DoD is facing. And And with that, then, some of these projects have gone on to create published papers with these midshipmen. So, they get the taste of what is it like to go through iterations of a paper, edit it, apply more econometric research, more data, so that we can make it more relevant to the reader.
Yeah.
And being involved in that process as an undergraduate is a very
rare.
unique experience, right?
As you describe this,
Yeah.
I keep thinking of graduate level work, graduate
Yeah.
seminars
So
you're describing.
we have one participant who worked on the innovation in the defense ecosystem. He's headed off to Oxford,
Yeah.
and he's planning to continue his research there
Love
at
it.
Oxford. We have others who are graduating that have stayed with us through the summer and have continued the research. And I think whether the topic is around defense innovation or
Yeah.
retention
Right.
of naval and marine officers, or how the DoD manages risk over time.
Right.
These are topics that aren't going away. And when these young men and women commission, they will have their service requirement, but eventually most of them are going to find their way into the Pentagon.
Right.
And I'm sure that the Joint Chiefs are going to be working on very similar problems, and they're going to have just a very unique perspective and
Basic experience,
Yeah.
having worked in these things at an early formative stage.
Right.
So I love that. Let's pause on that and maybe pan out just a little bit. Since this series is focused on great power competition, you're talking about some really specific and I can only imagine massively beneficial to the education of midshipmen programs that enable them to kind of roll up their sleeves and get into some of these things. Maybe we should ask now, to what end? What do you see because of your exposure at the IMF and working in risk and now, for some time working with midshipmen within DOD, tying together with people at the Pentagon, where do you see this competition going? We've asked this of several people now, different angles on this idea. Are we pointing toward conflict? What's the nature of the conflict? What's the nature of struggle? You come to this with an economist perspective. What do you see the next few years looking like, the operating environment that we're sending these young men and women into?
It's a great question. So I want to step back myself and just say, I have the privilege at the Naval Academy of teaching a class called the Economics of National Defense.
Yeah.
And there, as I discussed, we touch on the foundations of national defense. But I feel like my role here at the Naval Academy is to prepare these midshipmen for their role upon commissioning as naval officers. They will enter into what is today economic, financial, artificial intelligence, cyber, hybrid, asymmetric, whatever you want to call it, warfare, right? And although we may not see kinetic warfare, in the homeland, we are seeing it in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and certainly the preparations in Asia Pacific. But these midshipmen have a lot on their shoulders in terms of, commissioning as officers and understanding an environment where conflict is playing out in very different ways than it may have in World War I or World War II. Sure. In World War I, we fought 4 years of trench warfare. The technology really didn't change much in those 4 years.
Yep.
Now we're learning from Ukraine that technology cycles are estimated at about 6 weeks, right? Wow. But they're, spending summer blocks on, it could be surface warfare vessels, or they're in submarines, or they're doing aviation blocks. And they're seeing equipment that was procured 30 years ago, or on an Arleigh Burke that may be, 25 years old and has equipment that it was built for, with 2 missile bays on the top and, a helicopter pad. But meanwhile, they're reading about their recent graduates who are in the Gulf of Aden in an Arleigh Burke or, other vessels fighting off drones. And they're looking at this missile bay, are we going to shoot these $3 million missiles at these $50,000 drones? And in fact, that's the way we've dealt with that issue in the Gulf of Aden. Yeah. But, understanding the economics of this, you understand the importance of technology innovation, but also risk management, because at some point we're going to have to reevaluate what's on the deck of the Arleigh Burke, right? And the nature of the warfare. You know, when China has hypersonic weapons, you know, how are we going to protect those ships? But also, as those ships are attacked by very low-cost munitions coming from low-cost drones, you know, how will they be protected? And how will we put anti-drone technology on the Arleigh Burke? What admiral has to make that decision? What is their risk appetite when they have to take something off the deck that has been tested and true through decades of, you know, military exercises and even warfare? And now we have to adopt technology that we haven't really tested, that we haven't used directly and only have read about or advised on in Ukraine and other places. So I feel like
we're talking the intersection between economics and the military elements of national power here. So because you're focusing on that intersection, what are some of the big aha moments for midshipmen that you've seen in this? Because yes, they just came back off a Gray Hull cruise with standard missiles and all these exquisite systems. And so what after considering these cycles, as you say, of innovation, what are their big takeaways? What has been the moment of discovery in the midst?
I think as soon as we start talking about, you know, the tools of non-kinetic warfare, let's call it, right? You know, so how does the United States use diplomacy? How important are partners and allies? And start with a simple topic like that. Where do we have, you know, mutual defense treaties? What does that mean in terms of military exercises or the need to go to defense of an ally? Then you talk about the economics. You know, 2 years ago in the classroom, I was talking about, you know, export controls, import controls, you know, free trade, comparative advantage, specialization. Now we're talking about tariffs, right? What does that do? What does that do to your alliances, right? And your partnerships. And then, you know, getting into topics like financial warfare, the weaponization of the economic system. And, you know, it started decades ago, but, you know, we've really become pretty good at it. We're not perfect yet, but how do we use sanctions, right, to create, you know, financial difficulties for adversaries, whether we're in kinetic war or not, right? How do we exert coercive powers, right? And how do we use cyber defense and cyber war? How do we use, you know, tools of AI? How do we understand wargaming, right? So that we're, you know, setting up, you know, games, but we're showing how through backward induction and other kind of rational ideas about how people make decisions. You know, what could we say about how the adversary will respond, whether the technique the United States is using is kinetic or non-kinetic in terms of its use of coercion. So I think, you know, the objective big picture is to think of these young men and women as, you know, yes, they're students, they're undergraduate students, but they will be commissioned into one of the most complex environments. And I can only say, from my perspective, we are at war. We're at non-kinetic, you know, using tools of coercion to, you know, get what America wants. And whether we're, you know, strengthening allied relations or we're, you know, kind of America first, you know, we're still, as naval officers, thinking about, you know, how do we get what we want. Right?
And you hit on an important theme of this series, and it's based on the image outside the Stockdale Center. We're at war, or you're doing everything you can. And you're really talking about giving them the big picture of what war means in the 21st century as we look forward into the operating environments in which they'll operate. It's not, as you said earlier, World War I, purely kinetic. This is the confluence of a lot of elements of power, and they're getting at least a foundation, a grounding in some of these things. So that's fascinating too. But I think something that not many people realize.
Yeah, but imagine as a Marine officer, right, or as a, you know, a naval officer on a surface ship or in an airplane, you're often the first to arrive in a new territory, right? You represent America, right? You embody this country for all the people around the world that meet you, right? You have to understand, what does Malaysia want? You know, what do the Philippines need, right? And you're not going to be the ultimate decider, but these midshipmen, even as young officers, are going to be influential in how the Department of Defense and eventually other areas of government think about, how we get these countries to respond in ways that help them, but also help our country.
Yeah.
And so, understanding that Malaysia, while they are industrializing, is a big agricultural country and they need buyers of palm oil. Right.
Right.
And, China could buy the palm oil or the United States could buy the palm oil. Right. And it how they ally, as a country will depend on the economic benefit they receive.
So it brings new meaning to the strategic ensign, the strategic second lieutenant. They have a greater strategic understanding and be able to impact things more effectively that way.
That's right.
Well, that's a tremendous overview of the educational experience that midshipmen are getting toward what end or toward what purpose. Talk a little bit about your impact on the faculty too, because as the distinguished chair in economics, you've had conversations that have gone beyond the classroom with midshipmen. That's something that's close to our hearts, of course, in the Stockdale Center, because part of our mission, or at least our down and in portion of the mission, is to serve the needs of staff, faculty, and coaches. And you've been deeply involved in that process, to include summer workshops in great power competition. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm certain there are going to be a lot of people that listen to this, view this, and say, I didn't realize we were investing in that way, quite that way, to get people across the spectrum of our faculty or even coaches to better understand the operating environment. Talk about the workshop. Talk about some of the projects that came from faculty in that and the impact you think those will have.
Right. So great question. Thanks for, raising it. I think that, because of the Stockdale Center, but also the amazing leadership at the Naval Academy, when there's a good idea, there's a lot of momentum can be created very quickly. So, we came with the idea that, it's not just the midshipmen we need to impact, but we need to have a broader ripple effect because we can impact more midshipmen, not just through the economics department, but across humanities and the School of Engineering, the mathematics and science, also cyber. If we can bring professors together, whether they're military or civilian professors, to help us understand some of these concepts of, what coercion looks like, right? And how does a nation gain power vis-a-vis another country? And so we, working together with a broad set of leaders across the yard, a group to really think through how could we train our faculty to incorporate some of these themes of great power competition into their classrooms. So whether they're teaching physics, mathematics, robotics and engineering, mechanical, electrical, material science, or whether they're in the cyber department, or whether they're history professors or English professors. One of the first things we did was look in the AI. So, we asked, Google Gemini, how would you incorporate some of these themes of great power competition into a physics class or into a material science class? And we got back lots of answers, which tells us, that these AI trained on public data, other universities are thinking about the same thing. And the Naval Academy needs to be on the forefront of this, right?
Yeah.
So what we did was we went in and in a week-long workshop, worked with almost 20 professors from across the yard, all these different schools.
Right.
And we thought about this construct that has existed in the Department of Defense for some time. It's called DIME, but it's diplomacy, information, military, economics.
Right.
And we added a few themes like resilience and financial, tools that we have. But we call it DIME Plus.
Yeah.
And we started working through these themes, what has some of the literature said, but, how do nations gain power, right? And how could we incorporate this into the syllabus of all of our classes or many of our classes across the yard. So the project also covered important topics of ethics and leadership. And,
Speaking my language now. Speaking my language.
thinking through, how, the naval officer will not, or the Marine officer will not only think about, these tools of coercion, but do this using the best, kind of theories of leadership and models of ethics that, we teach as part of their training at the academy. Giving professors ideas that, this is about forming a whole midshipman, not just about supplementing a calculus class or a physics class or an economics class, right? So I think we came up with some amazing ideas across the yard in terms of how these themes could be integrated. All the professors involved, had a project and were, going to take these ideas back into their faculty meetings, but also, into their syllabus, as they teach classes relevant to this. But I would challenge all faculty at the Naval Academy and, at any university really to think through, great power competition and how it affects the young minds, right, that we're helping to shape here at the Naval Academy. And in our case, really commission officers that not only understand the tools of kinetic warfare and lethality, but understand that lethality means, how can we apply this to the economic tools of dominance and financial tools of dominance, because we need to be lethal, on the military field, but also in the economic system.
Right.
And the best type of lethality is going, non-kinetic lethality is going to ensure we don't have to use the kinetic type.
Right.
That's a controversial statement, but I'll stand by it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I absolutely love it. So we've talked a lot about the down and in, the impact that your programs, your courses have, the way you solve problems has on midshipmen. We've also talked a little bit about the staff, faculty, coaches development here. Let's talk about the up and out mission for just a little bit. You're about to get on a plane here shortly to do what a lot of us do around here, and that is engage, in this case, with NATO. Talk a little bit about the project you're about to embark on and what you see the implications of that for this kind of grander scheme of education and development that we're all engaged in.
Yeah, so Joe, I don't have to tell you, I feel like what a privilege it has been to be at the Naval Academy, but also, understand the work that the Naval Academy has contributed to, in this case, for over 8 years. We've been an active participant with academics from the United States, but also from Europe, thinking through officer training for NATO countries. And, the power of this in terms of, instilling values that are important. But in this case, we're taking up a theme of technology disruption, but also more broadly, these economic tools of coercion and how we can incorporate those into an officer training program. So we'll be in Germany working on curriculum development for NATO officers, really learning the lessons of, a long history of training NATO officers, but also thinking about how our technology environment, our economic environment, our financial environment are changing, and how that needs to be shaping the minds of NATO officers as they do their work and as they exist in proximity to conflict. One of the important lessons we're learning from Ukraine is that, the targeting, the kinetic targeting that is happening is, of course, it's on the Russian adversary, the Russian military, but it's also on economic targets. So, I can review with our midshipmen the fact that, Ukraine is very focused right now on Russian refineries and gas and oil production facilities. And the objective is to disrupt the economy and the civilian, kind of interactions in the Russian economy. And in this case, creating a situation where many Russians now have to be granted ration tickets for gasoline
Right.
and queue up for gasoline. This affects their daily lives. They're not able to drive as far as
Sure.
they wish. They have to spend time at the gas station. And, the idea being, maybe this creates a little unhappiness with the
Saps the
continued
will.
war, sapping
Saps
the
the will
will,
of the country.
questioning the leadership, right?
Yeah.
So, in this case, I think it's a perfect example where, the economics of warfare are very critical to the mission of what's happening on the
Sure.
ground, on the
Sure.
field, right? And you don't need an active war to exert this type of coercion.
Yeah.
Right, is going to be the message.
So this curriculum that you're creating, it sounds a lot like the leadership ethics character curriculum that folks around here have been an active participant in the creation of. There's been other programs that people don't necessarily associate the Naval Academy with that type of engagement. But NATO's Partnership for Peace program takes this out beyond Europe. I know former Soviet republics across Central Asia,
Africa.
Many African countries in the defense education program are kind of aligning to
Latin American countries.
Latin American countries are aligned to this. So this is global outreach.
Right.
And emerging technology, AI, in this particular case, is going to be, those lessons will be spread far and wide.
Right.
So that's amazing.
Yeah. So how can these little butterfly wings, create the ripples, right, that not only affect our midshipmen, but their lives as future commissioned officers? Sure. And then, how can the Naval Academy impact, the thinking, even for militaries outside of our borders, right? And I think it's a very powerful and privileged position we're in. But the resources we have here and, the type of mission that we support really lends itself to, that type of outreach, right? And standing up as a role model for other institutions around the world. Right.
Yeah, especially in such a dangerous, fraught environment in which we see our graduates going into. Since the theme of your experience, at least one of the themes, has been risk, what do you see as the principal risks in this moment for great power competition?
I think it's the most important question we're asking today. And I want to reflect on a book that was just published this week. A guy named Dan Wang has written a book called Breakneck. And it's about, trying to understand fundamentally, who are Americans, like who are the Chinese, right? And what is
from
it
a cultural standpoint?
From a cultural, from a character, how we've been formed by our experiences, right? National character.
That's interesting.
He makes the argument, and I tend to agree with him based on my experience in grad school in New York, where I went to school with a lot of Chinese people in the 80s, not to age myself. But, what I found was, and he makes this claim that Chinese and Americans are very, very similar in our character, right? We're fundamentally curious people, but by the same token, we're a bit lazy. Right? So we're always looking for shortcuts. We're always looking for innovations in our personal lives, but also as we operate in our companies and our organizations, right? And it leads to a certain cleverness and energy in the way we do things, right? That creates innovation and this desire for change, right? And I really think he's onto something, right?
I agree. That is interesting.
So, I think spending time thinking about the adversary, right? Really what motivates them? How are they similar to us? How are they different? And thinking through, certainly if we see weaknesses, right? How can they be better understood? But also, what is it about the way we operate that could complement the way China operates as an adversary, right? What do they really want as a country, for their people? And so I would say, the biggest risk is not, totally understanding the adversary. So we need to be thinking about their character, their motivations, and not to say that they aren't an adversary, but that we need to appreciate, our similarities, but also understand the differences. One day they might be exploited, right? As could the similarities. So I think it's important to to, think of our cultural studies groups, our languages groups, our history professors, and how they bring ideas about, grand strategy and Japan and China and the United States, Russia. We all have long, rich histories, right? And there's a lot of lessons learned in that.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And I think also in the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of books written about this topic of, economic financial coercion. There's a great book by Henry Farrell, about the weaponization of the world economy and how the U.S. has been at the heart of that, but how we can achieve many of our objectives non-kinetically. I think that's important. A guy named Ed Fishman has written a book called Choke Points, right, which is about economic warfare.
Yep.
And the success and failures the United States has had. So I think that going back to your question on risk, I think it's understanding, our adversary and making sure we're pulling from all these different sources. So our commissioned naval officers will not only be rich in terms of, their training in leadership and ethics and warfare, but also their cultural appreciations.
Consider that another case made for the broad liberal arts education it is in the Naval Academy, much to the surprise, I guess, of some.
Again.
Yeah, very good.
But I think we face other risks. We have a significant risk in our manufacturing, what we call the manufacturing base of the United States, and whether we will continue to promote jobs and skill sets in those areas, because the defense industrial base of the United States depends critically on the strength of the manufacturing base.
Of course.
We made a lot of strides in terms of things like batteries and chips, over the last 4 or 5 years. We need to continue because at the end of the day, a drone is nothing but a battery with some munitions attached, right? And if we don't have a viable battery industry, we're not going to ever compete well, with drones from a civilian or military economic perspective. So I think, really thinking through the defense industrial base and how we're going to achieve technological superiority. How are we going to continue fundamental research so we maintain a leadership, a technology leadership? And, one of the greatest forms of deterrence is, that technology prowess and an adversary, whether it's Russia or China, not really understanding what we could field. Right. And that a kind of uncertainty around the technology that exists and that we cultivate through Silicon Valley, through our large defense contractors. And so that fundamental research and ensuring that universities and research labs are well funded, that's addressing a really critical risk, because technology is warfare and it's the future, whether we win or lose.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think those few things, like the understanding the adversary, I'd say the defense industrial base, and then I'd say the continued technological advantage of the United States are really critical risks we have to be addressing every day.
That's great. As we look back at conflict in the 20th century, great power conflict in the Second World War, for example, I think there's a pretty conclusive case that has been made by historians that the ultimate advantage enjoyed by the United States in the Second World War was our capacity to build stuff, to bring economic power to bear, to be the engine that drove the Allies' war effort. Is that the case for the 21st century as well? As we look forward into this next phase of great power competition, is economics at the heart of success? Is it going to spell success for us?
So specifically after World War II, Franklin Roosevelt described the arsenal of democracy, right? And that the United States needed to continue, building what had been the, kind of the advantage that the U.S. had, and we gave to our allies in World War II and led to victory in that, very difficult war. And it was about the economics, the economic advantage, the ability to grow industries, bring together a labor force, even when you had a huge number of men fighting, the ability to tap women and other sources as labor. So I would argue as an economist that it is the economic power of the United States that creates the ultimate deterrence to any adversary. So whether we're looking at our ability to wage warfare and be a strong military good producer, and because we have a strong manufacturing base, or just having the economic wherewithal to grind through years and years of war, it all hinges on economic strength. And what we do today in terms of our financial policies, our trade policies, are critically important to understanding whether the United States will grow at 2.5% a year or 3% a year or 3.5% a year. And anything we do that takes away from that annual growth rate of economics, what we call our GDP, now at about $30 trillion, really erodes our ability to exert economic dominance in the future. True. So if we believe that there are economic policies, say tariffs, that have a long-run impact in terms of reducing our imports, and our net consumption as a country, but also providing the intermediate goods we need to manufacture the things we do produce in the United States. And that causes our growth rate to go, now the IMF is estimating, a decreased growth rate for the United States. Below 2% annually. And if you multiply that, 1% reduction in economic growth, it may not seem like a lot to the average Americans. An economist has calculated that it could hit our pocketbook by about $1,000 per household this year. But if you look at the long-term impacts and what an erosion of whether it's 0.2% or 0.5% or a full percent, that has enormous consequences for our grandchildren. Sure. Right. And our ability to, as a huge economy, continue to bring the base of that economy to, bigger and bigger numbers, it gets eroded. And so I would argue that our economic strength, again, whether it's our ability to, quickly create an arsenal of democracy for ourselves, but also our allies, and then, create the, kind of the economic dominance that's needed, just the wealth required to grind through years of warfare, whether it's economic or, kinetic warfare, right? That takes a strong country and one that is constantly getting stronger. So yes, I'm an abundance economist. I think we constantly need to be looking at ways to grow our economy, and, supplement our labor force, supplement the way we're creating technologies, bringing in great ideas. But that is fundamental to American strength. Yeah.
So Professor Brenda Boltwood, the Crowe Chair in the Department of Economics, quite a sprint through the impact that you're having, the impact the educational process has on midshipmen, and well beyond that. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, and with all gratitude. I feel nothing but just appreciation for the mission here and what you and the whole Academy do for people here in the yard, but also globally
and beyond.
So I feel so grateful.
Well, like you, it's a labor of love. No question about that.
Thank you.
Brenda, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.